Met Nerds om tafel wordt al meer dan 3 jaar mede mogelijk gemaakt door ICT Group. De beste digitale transformator van 2022 en 2023. Je werkt er met meer dan 2100 toegewijde technische professionals en met meer dan 100 vacatures zit daar zeker iets voor jou tussen. ICT Group loopt voorop in industriële automatisering en digitale transformatie. En zo bewijzen ze al meer dan 45 jaar expertise in tal van branches. Maar ze zijn eigenlijk vooral benieuwd naar jouw ideeën. Hoe ga jij hun klanten helpen om bedrijfsprocessen efficiënter, flexibeler, eenvoudiger, veiliger en duurzamer te maken? Kijk op jobs.ict.eu. Be you, be one of us. ICT Group. Deze week is met Nerds om tafel even iets anders dan je van ons gewend bent. We hebben namelijk niet 1, maar 3 afleveringen voor je. Vanaf de Public Spaces Conferentie 2024 met als thema Taking Back the Internet. In deze aflevering hoor je over AI in de samenleving en hoe je begrip kunt kweken door in andermans schoenen te lopen in mixed reality ervaringen. Welkom bij Met Nerds om tafel. Ik zit opnieuw niet naast Jurian, maar ik ben wel Randal Pelen. En onze gastnerd van vandaag zijn er 2. De eerste is Hans de Zwart. We zijn nog steeds op de Public Spaces Conferentie op 2024 met als thema Taking Back the Internet. Hans, je hebt hier vaker gezeten. Je bent voormalig directeur Bits Freedom, onderzoeker en docent aan de Hogeschool van Amsterdam. Bedankt voor je komst en leuk dat je er weer bent.
Heel fijn om hier weer te zijn.
Ja, en je hebt net een panel meegedaan. Dat ging over, wat stond er ook alweer? De impact van AI op de maatschappij of op de samenleving. Hoe noemden ze dat ook alweer?
Ik weet het niet eens, maar volgens mij ging het over de toekomst van AI en de rol die kunst daarbij kan spelen.
Ja. Nou, we hebben ook een kunstenares meegenomen. Dat is Karen Palmer. En ik moet jullie waarschuwen met Nerds om de tafel, luisteraars. Jullie luisteren al 7 jaar naar ons, maar dit wordt de eerste keer dat wij in het Engels gaan praten, want Karen Palmer doesn't speak Dutch.
Sorry.
So, welcome in our podcast and congratulations on being the first English-speaking guest that we actually found it necessary to switch over to English for, because I think this is an interesting topic that we really have to tackle. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for accommodating my lack of Dutch language.
So to actually introduce you real quick, Karen Palmer, you're supposedly a visionary storyteller and award-winning XR creator. XR, that's mixed reality, right?
Yes, yeah. XR is extended reality.
Extended reality.
Which includes mixed reality, virtual reality, yeah, AI, augmented reality, basically all forms of extended reality.
Yeah, and as an AR artist, you try to tackle or explore the social implications of artificial intelligence and technology through immersive experience.
That's me.
Say. Yeah, and I think you're probably most well known because you made a movie or film or something in between, Consensus
Gentium.
Gentium.
Well done in attempting to say that.
Yeah.
And it's Latin, so it's not English or Dutch. So consensus gentium is Latin for if everyone believes it must be true.
Okay.
So it's a comment on the society and our perception of reality.
And the consensus part I can follow.
Yeah. The consensus is everybody. And that is an immersive experience in using AI, which watches you back using artificial intelligence and facial recognition. And it's set in the near future world so that you can experience a world of pervasive surveillance and how it impacts you as a person and a citizen. And it happens within the palm of your hand on a smartphone. So the front-facing camera on the smartphone watches you as you interact with this world on the device. So people are texting you, or you're watching propaganda films from the government or influencers, and you have a certain objectives to achieve to kind of prove your compliance to the state.
Prove your compliance. This is already getting very dystopian real quick. But it's not actually a film then, is it?
No, it's an immersive experience. So it uses facial recognition and to monitor you. And the narrative branches in real time depending on your eye gaze or emotional response.
Yeah. So I asked Hans beforehand, what's some questions I really need to ask Karen? And the first thing he mentioned is that you're
my lipstick, maybe.
He warned me that you actually tend to kind of embrace a certain character or be in character. Like you're telling us from the stage that you're from the future. You're warning us for a couple of possible futures that we could enter into. And is this a real conscious way of embracing your inner artist and trying to seduce us to build a better future, or is this an act? Or
quite offended that it was a character. This is the real me. The Karen Palmer is the character. So the storyteller from the future is my persona. That is really, I genuinely feel that we have a collective consciousness as a people, and I feel that I just tap into that as a creative in terms of where inspiration comes from, where does imagination comes from, where does it pop from? And that's part of my tapping in with the storyteller from the future.
I really like the angle you take there, because I've already memorized the fact that there's someone from the future at this conference, and I think I'll remember this for a while. So it's really clever way of putting it.
I feel that a lot of things that resonate with people, there's some aspect of truth in it. You know, it just connects with you on some kind of level that maybe tomorrow when you're brushing your teeth, you're like, that something about that made my hairs in the back of my neck go up, or, you know, it really is a feeling, you know, more than it's intellectual. And a lot of my work is about this kind of collective truth that I see, which is different to perception. When we think of consensus gentium, some things are just almost, it's intuitive, you just know in your spirit. And some is a bit more manipulative, like maybe different truths about, say, politicians, you know? So I feel this storyteller from the future and the stories I tell from the future, when people hear these stories, it really resonates with them and they get very nervous because they're like, wow, that seems really real. And often when I create my experiences a year or two later, they kind of pop up in this time. Or aspects of those realities, like I made the experience Perception I.O., which is about the future of law enforcement, where you watch the film as if you're a cop and the film branches in real time, depending on how you interact with it. And that was to show people that when they think, oh yeah, AI is a computer, it's neutral, it knows everything, that it's actually coded by a person, a developer who has their own particular biases that is coded into these systems. So if they are biased against people of color, say, that will be coded in. And so that when people do these experiences and they interact with the characters as a cop, if they are aggressive, then the character in the film, their character becomes aggressive to the person. And if they're calm as a cop, they can de-escalate the situation. And from doing these experiences, people go, oh, I understand a little bit about how AI might work because it's visceral, I'm connected, I'm there. And they start to develop a different relationship with AI. And then when I made that, the very next year was the first system came out. Well, it was the first case of a black man, Robert Williams, who was misidentified by an algorithm and arrested because of bias within a law enforcement system, which is basically the real world equivalent of my experience.
Yes, and it wasn't surprising that was a black person who was misidentified.
Yeah, it was kind of obvious in a way, and that's why it was in my film, is that if the majority of systems, particularly up to now, things are changing, but have been developed by white males. And if those white males have bias, they're going to program that into the system. So that's why there's a real need for diversity in creating these systems to kind of expand the perception of these data sets.
Yeah, it's real hard to imagine being from a different race if you have experienced being, in my case, white all your life. Now, I think racism is subtly a little bit different in the Netherlands than it is in the States, obviously, culturally. But still, I find it very hard to imagine. Like a colleague of mine told me, he's black, and he told me most of the time when I'm driving at night through my city in my Tesla Model X, I get pulled over. And I told him, like, why? Because I've never been pulled over in my life. And he told me, like, well, it happens and it didn't happen in my previous car. And I think it would be really interesting to experience that, maybe through virtual reality, me driving in my car, being pulled over, and then afterwards getting a question like, okay, why do you think you were pulled over? It wouldn't occur to me for a second that it could possibly be because of the color of my skin. But I would think about my car or traffic tickets that I still had standing out. I really love to experience something like that.
Wow. I'm just so blown away by our different realities that we live within. There is actually an XR experience called driving while black. Not driving while black. It's eating while being traveling while black.
Yeah.
And it's related to the South. But what you're saying...
Texas?
I don't know where, but it was to do, I think like back in time, like to do with voting. But I'm just so blown away by what you've just said. And also when we shot Perception.io, we had the exact same conversation with the two characters, black and white. And the black character is exactly what your black character friend said. And the white character was like, oh, no, what happened is he said, then the DOP said, oh God, I had this experience where we finished the video shoot late and we had to drive back. And I drove back in the passenger seat of the white guy. And the white guy kept just like breaking all the red lights. He's like, man, you got to slow down. You got to slow down. And he said the police came and they were like, buddy, why do you think we stopped you? And the white guy was like, come on, man, give me a break. It's late. What did you expect? It's late, man. Why you stopped me? And the black guy was in the passenger seat going, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Like he would never even ever consider having this conversation, say being in the car was like way too close.
Not even a conversation. It's like...
just being close proximity is like death. And all the black people on set were like, he said, what? And he's still alive. He goes, yeah. He goes, he couldn't, he felt, basically he was living in an alternative universe.
Yeah.
Which is kind of...
he's actually having a discussion with his police officer. Yeah.
But also quite aggressively.
Yeah.
Where we as black people, we have to become very passive, immediately to disarm the situation. So these are some of the kind of conversations which my works kind of draw out. We want to use the tech, but it's more about exploring the societal implications of AI, which underpins the technology. Yeah.
So how difficult is it then to make these kinds of experiences? I'm tempted to call them film still, but...
they are immersive experiences, but because I'm a filmmaker, they have a strong film component.
But how do you go about, because you have to consider a lot of branches that could happen in the story. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and nobody's going to see all the different branches. So I first of all start with my concept and what I want the participant to experience.
Yeah.
And how I want them to feel will determine the story arc and then also the tech I use. I don't go, oh, wow, I want to use AI. Wow, I want to use VR. I go, okay, what is my story? I'm like a proper arty creative. And then that will determine. And just for the past, since 2016, it's only been AI for me because I was like, I want to create an imperceptible interface.
Imperceptible interface.
So that you watch my films and then they branch because they watch you back. But I don't put a headset on you. So it's
you don't have to make explicit choices.
No, because it's your face.
It reacts on your face.
An article in a magazine once said with my films that your brain is the joystick.
Ah, okay.
Cool,
I like
right?
that.
Yeah.
Actually, your face is, but still.
Yeah, okay,
it's very
cool.
closely connected.
But still, it's kind of like you have an emotion or a thought or a feeling, and then it's reflected in your face. Yeah. So if you feel aggressive, then it comes out in like how you frown.
But would it be fair to say that then actually is more of an app than... So
the latest film, Consensus Gentium, is an app.
It's an app.
The Perception.io was on the film space, but it was very important for me to create a format of an experience that could go to the people because I love doing what I do, but it's in a very kind of, for want of a better word, privileged space.
Yeah.
Lots of regular people aren't going to be going to some amazing conferences like this or South by Southwest. And it's very important for me to bring this message to the people. So I put it on the app, and actually it's going to be available to download on the App Store.
It's going to be, or is it already?
It's going to be. We're doing it right now. Like, I shouldn't really be here. I was supposed to, my team were not very happy with me. But as I'm coming to the Netherlands. So yeah, they'll be happy that I mentioned it on the podcast. But we're developing it now in the UK, and we're going to be releasing it on the App Store during the summer of 2024.
I'm really looking forward to that, because I like the idea a lot, and I want that to succeed, actually.
I
really love to have more of those kinds of experiences.
Thank you.
Creative stuff in the App Store. Hans, so there's something going on here, is that I think I see a trend where more and more artists are interested in both tech, AI, but also heavy stuff like government surveillance, and trying to use art to convey that message, that story. At the same time, some of these artists aren't that technical at all. They just have to use this as a tool to be creative. Do you think artists have an important role to play in these kinds of stories, and maybe even, how do you say it? Activism, maybe?
So I don't necessarily think that the role of the artist is to be an activist. The role of the artist is to be an artist. But they have an essential role to play, I think. And so in the panel, I quoted my favorite thinker, Marshall McLuhan, thinker about technology, who in his book, Understanding Media, in the beginning, he cites Ezra Pound, a writer, who says artists are the antenna of our society. So they have the ability to see things much earlier than the rest of the world. That is probably, I think, a characteristic of great artists quite often. And so we tend to have this maybe layman's idea of art as sort of self-expression or this thing, but art also has this very much this prophetic quality to it. And I think it's very important to listen to that and to sort of enable and create a space for artists to do that. So it's important to fund that type of art. Because it can help us prepare to deal with the societal and psychological consequences of a world that is changing through technology, if that makes sense.
It does, but can you think of any examples from the top of your head?
So probably for the audience of Met Nerds om tafel, do you know what that means actually? No. It's with nerds at the table.
Around the table, actually.
Around the table,
like we're at this table together. Yeah.
So, but maybe Black Mirror. That's like a hugely impactful.
I don't think of Black Mirror as art, but actually it could be considered art. Yeah, why not? Obviously.
Yeah, but you can't. Yeah, it can't be that it's no longer art when you like it, Randal.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Let's go deep here. Why not?
I think you meant because it was mainstream, but God, it's cheeky, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
my goodness, that's a cheeky response.
No, we Dutch people are very direct. You have to dial our directness down a bit. That was like a drill
in their head. That's direct. I'm going to watch out.
I didn't feel it that way. No, I like this.
I'm English. I'm not Dutch, just to let you know, yeah?
Yeah.
Sadomasochistic, but okay, let's keep going.
So Black Mirror is, I think, a very good example of that. I think Karen's work is that. Paolo Sirios, who was also in the panel, he does a lot of work around surveillance. And so it's like you reframe things, you make people, ideally you make people think or feel and think sort of with a future focus.
Yeah. Okay, so you've been the director of Bits of Freedom before. So obviously there is a kind of activist in you already. Certainly around topics surrounding privacy and holding the government accountable and stuff. But do you think... what kind of role does art play in that, and what kind of role do you see yourself playing? Because I don't think you consider yourself an artist, and still I think there's a lot of warning signs artists can give, but there's also the here and now and the activist who has to sound the alarm and gets actually get stuff done. That doesn't have to make you think about them, but actually have to give you tangible, concrete steps to take towards building that future.
Yeah. Yeah. So Bits of Freedom is for Karen. It's an NGO focusing on privacy and freedom of speech on the internet. And when I started out there, we had this very strong presence of both, I would say, computer scientists and legal people, lawyers.
Both could be considered nerds.
Yeah, both are very much nerds. So I would say this is the
proper
one
grown-ups.
Yeah.
This is the one place where IT nerds and legal nerds share a table and like each other. And I explicitly added the component of art and imagination, maybe storytelling, as sort of a third branch that was necessary to be a successful activist. Because you need to be able to tell stories about what it is that you want. You need to imagine the consequences of the things that are happening now. You need to create alternative futures. And also you need to be able to sort of sell your story in a sense. So and for that you need storytelling, because stories are the only things that resonate with people. Nobody likes to read the AI Act, which is hundreds of pages of, it's not a thing that anybody but a lawyer, but a particular lawyer is interested in. And so you need people who can tell the story of that act in a sense, and who can translate it into something that resonates with people. So for me, it's an essential thing. I mean, there's other forms of imagination. So I'm a philosopher, and as an ethicist, I use this concept of moral imagination, which is this thing like trying to imagine what could possibly go wrong with the technology that you're designing or making, etc. And it starts with asking very simple questions like, what could somebody with bad intentions do with this technology? Or which people are excluded by this technology? Does it work the same way for everybody? Or what is the worst possible imaginable headline you can imagine in a newspaper about this technology? What would be the... And so if you start working through these things, and preferably in a very diverse group of people with different standpoints, then you can you can start to get an idea of what the consequences could be. And so, but it's important to create space for that. And it's important to have the political will for that. Because for me, the technology is actually never the problem. It's the politics behind it.
Yeah.
So like...
and the unintended consequences as well.
Yes, so technology always has unintended consequences. But like very often in you can't be too surprised if you're scoring welfare applicants with a fraud risk model that you're going to create and damage people. That's not like it's not that hard to imagine that could be a consequence. And so even though it might have not been intended, it's also like...
So if the people that created the Dutch welfare system had done your mirror exercise, probably after half an hour, they said, okay, time out, let's not do this.
Instead of that, we chose to just go ahead and do it, and then deal with the consequences for a lot of years afterwards.
So I used to teach at primary school, and then I had lots of students doing shitty things.
Of course.
And then I would tell them...
That was our job.
I would be angry at them. And then they said, I didn't do it on purpose. And then I said, well, you also did not purposely not do it. And that's my point. You should have not done it on purpose. Like, I don't mind. So to me, it's very much about thinking about what you're doing. A conscious decision, intentional decisions. Not, I mean, here in the city of Amsterdam, we've had also another welfare risks algorithm, which was basically created because they had the smart data science to make it. They were looking for a problem to
solve,
attach it to.
Ja. Hey, psst, ik heb een vraag. Hoe vaak zit jij achter je facturen aan? Nou, ik ben echt gezegend met braaf betalende klanten, maar dat is wel eens anders geweest. Als je niet oppast ben je meer een eigen incassobureau dan een ondernemer. En facturen najagen is echt niet mijn favoriete bezigheid. Maar daar is een oplossing voor. Heb je al gehoord van Teamleader Focus? In de vorige aflevering hadden we het over hoe je je administratie kunt stroomlijnen. Maar dat is niet alles. Met Teamleader Focus kun je automatische betaalherinneringen versturen. En het mooiste is dat je een melding krijgt zodra je factuur betaald is en dus geen gedoe meer hebt. Dus je hoeft niet meer continu achter je facturen aan. En wist je dat facturen via Teamleader Focus gemiddeld 2 keer zo snel worden betaald? Dat klinkt wel handig, toch? Zo houden ondernemers zoals ik meer tijd over om ons te focussen op wat we echt leuk vinden. Zoals het maken van podcasts bijvoorbeeld. En ook minder stress over betalingen. Voor alle MKB'ers die luisteren, check focusopjebedrijf.nl en ontdek hoe Teamleader Focus je cashflow op orde houdt. Automatische herinneringen, snellere betalingen. Lijkt mij een goede reden om Teamleader Focus even te bekijken. Teamleader Focus is dé bedrijfssoftware voor het MKB die je leven makkelijker maakt. Ga naar focusopjebedrijf.nl en kies vandaag nog voor minder stress en meer succes.
Yeah, and at the same time, I catch myself thinking like these kinds of points that you make from a more like an activism standpoint sound very principled to me sometimes. I think it's, well, this is all imaginary. This is a future that could happen, but well, I don't think it will turn out that way that quickly. And then probably we need artists like Karen to actually paint a picture of that future and make us imagine or maybe even experience that future firsthand and see, okay, now if this were to happen, how would that feel? And how what would it be like to live through such an experience? Because I'm always frustrated if I try to imagine a future where everything goes wrong and then still think, well, I have enough money to move over there where it's still going to be dry when the flooding comes, and I'll escape, I'll manage. No problems here. And then having the courage to imagine being in someone else's shoe, I think it's very difficult to get people there. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing you're trying to do on a daily basis, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of doing one step removed from what you're saying, in that I'm enabling people to experience a potential future today.
Yeah.
But by being a branching narrative, it's making them aware of their role. It gives them agency in the story. And so if they make a certain subconscious decision, that's going to lead down a certain path. Now, you're happy with that path? Are you happy with that ending? And because it's subconscious, it's not something that they can go, it's something which is real and true. They don't even aware of it themselves. So it's kind of going back to your point about intentionality. Like the child didn't, but you could have chosen not to do it because they're just not self-aware. So my work is about making people self-aware of the consequences of their actions. So then they can't say afterwards, well, I didn't know. Like your kids will say, I didn't know. So with my experiences, you have these options. You're a character in this film and you download this government app, and you can offer up this concept called auto self-surveillance, where you give the government access to all your devices.
So you're opting in then?
Yeah. You're opting in to this concept called auto self-surveillance, where you give them access to all your devices, and so your computers, your phone, and they can use that as a surveillance, a personal surveillance network. Yeah. And then you get extra privileges for that.
Of course, yeah.
Of course, right?
Like, there's a carrot at the end of that stick.
Yeah. And then also that's in your house. So, people that come in your house, they're being surveilled, and you've given the government permission for that. And so for that, you get certain privileges, but there's consequences for that. So through my experience, get to understand the consequences of compliance. That at the beginning, it might seem like, oh, this is a bit more comfortable, but where you get to is probably not going to be a super comfortable place to be. But then also there's consequences for that, the same way for dissidents. If you go, I'm not going to opt into that, then you end up on a different list, a different kind of bracket, and you end up with a different ending, which is also problematic because you don't have those privileges, but you have a different type of freedom. So my work, it's not a judgment when you do my experiences. You just have these different endings, And then if you don't like them, you can do the experience again.
Yeah,
and you
of
can
course.
experience the future in a different way. And then I want you to start to contemplate and reflect to see, are you happy with those? And where is your life going? What decisions are you making now? And where could that potentially lead?
So I think it's very powerful that in your experiences you put people in a role, which forces them to sort of empathize with others in a sense. So we have this, I think we have this nearly ironic situation where. So my favorite example of this is, it used to be the case. I'm not sure how it is now because I have left LinkedIn years ago. But in the past, it would people, when they didn't have a job, in LinkedIn at their job title, they would say looking for new opportunities, something like that. Yeah. And then LinkedIn created this feature where it would ask you to congratulate your connection about being 2 years into a new job. But in this case, it would be 2 years. Congratulate Karen for 2 years of looking for new opportunities.
Oh, is that?
And LinkedIn never created the option to say, like, I don't have a job or whatever. And I was like, yes, of course, because the people who work at LinkedIn, they cannot imagine a world in which you don't have a job that you
2
can sort
years. You've been living on the street.
And so there is this, I mean, maybe it's too generalizing, but of course, we have a lot of neurodiversity in computer science. Let's say.
Thank you.
And we also have a lot of people who are maybe not the best empathizers in the world, and so these type of experiences can sort of help with that. So my personal favorite things. So it doesn't need to even be this high tech. Yeah, it can be. You have this computer game called Papers, Please. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Papers, Please. Yeah,
it's a game where you're put in the role of somebody at the customs or at the, how do you call it, immigration at a border, and
douane.
You have to check basically people's passports and decide whether you want to let them in or not. And then it adds these.
So you're really powerful in this game.
Sounds like.
And it adds these complications. You have a sick wife at home. They need money. Your salary is actually not enough. There's people there that are willing to bribe you a little. The rules keep changing. You get these moral dilemmas. And it forces you to realize, it basically allows you to understand why corruption starts to exist.
But it also allows you to be really savage and just deny everybody and be a god or something.
It doesn't. But then, then it doesn't end well. There's a similar game where you have to be like you've just come into power as a president in a Latin America country in the 70s or something. You have to decide, am I going to side with the US or with the Russians? You have, of course, mothers that are protesting against their disappeared sons. You have angry farmers. You have, and no matter I think how you play this game, eventually you'll end dead on the floor with some coup with somebody with the army taking over.
Yeah. That's how it ends.
But these experiences
sounds legit.
These experiences are a wonderful way, and I imagine, I haven't gone through your experience, Karen, but I imagine that it's the same there. That they instead of sort of making the world simpler, they're actually they're showing the complexity of the world.
Yes.
Yes. Just to add two things, I'm loving your examples, by the way, is one time I was in Russia doing a talk and I met this professor there and they said to me something profound that always stayed with me. And they said, they were a professor from film, and they said, they don't think it's the art itself, which is the catalyst for change, but it's kind of the reflection and the conversation afterwards where it really happens. And I was like, wow, that's so deep, because I really build in this kind of emotional decompression with my work. So that like these conversations is like creating new neural networks in our brains, which is really where things are going to start to expand out. And the second thing, slightly different to what you said, is that I'm not actually into empathy. I'm into moving through fear, because I'm a little bit jaded about empathy, because empathy's been around for a while now and there's been no changes, right? And there's all this like, oh, if I could only, understand how you feel. It's like, well, it's a bit more complicated than that. So my work is a lot about moving through fear, about how giving us the onus on what we do. So I use parkour, because I'm a free runner, as part of this psychology and methodology within my work. It's always about putting the mirror back on you and getting it's uncomfortable for you and getting to move through fear. So it's not about how the other person's feeling or relating to them. It's like, well, let's just focus on you. There's always somebody else you can point your finger at. What's stopping you from doing this thing? Like most of the times when I speak to people about why they're not doing something, it's because of fear. Like I can't do that thing because if I pursue my dream, then maybe I won't have money for the rent, or maybe I might lose my boyfriend or my girlfriend, or I can't buy those things. And it's always preceded with the word if. You know, fear is like this kind of illusion. And my work is about, let me kind of put you through these if scenarios, and then you're going to experience them from yourself. And then you're going to wonder, is that the worst that could actually happen? Like if I'm compliant at the beginning.
So in a weird way, you're actually trying to instill some fear as well.
I'm trying to make people confront fear by in a gentle film way. It's very safe. It's like a film world, but it's like I'm using almost the power of visualization, but through film. So what happens with my experience is you do them, and then the film branches depending on how you respond. And so if you're angry, then you get a narrative responding to your anger. And then if you leave if the kind of the film then collapses and you're looking at in the real world, it's exactly the same thing. If you're an aggressive person, the film will respond to your anger. So I'm kind of giving you, I call them reality simulators, that it's giving you a little insight to your world that you can go away, reflect, and then come back and maybe change something.
Could I also just hold a happy face towards the camera and then watch it unfold as well?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that seriously. Is that I had a friend of mine in New York, and did the experience, and he got through to the end because he was very calm. And I said, how was that? And he goes, well, inside I was seething. I said, oh shit. He goes, no, that's the thing. Everybody always says to me, wow, you're so calm, you know, you're so always in control. He goes, so my work is about how you're perceived. So he's always perceived as control. So the camera couldn't actually, in this instance, you're right, actually, it's not the brain, it's more the face, is how he was perceived. He was focused on being perceived as calm. And so that's what was being registered.
It's also a beautiful lesson to learn through that experience.
Exactly.
So no problems here.
That's it's all
beautiful.
about self-awareness, about how people are perceiving you. So me and him had a great conversation afterwards about, that's how he's perceived. And this is a confirmation that, you know, he's not always happy, and he was being treated for depression, and how, you know, he's really got to kind of focus on dealing with the core of what's happening, because now he's putting on a happy face. And I think that was one of the things that made him go towards the therapy, because he was like, this is really not who I am, and I really need to tackle this at the root.
This experience is really useful as well.
Yeah, it's very, very much about self-awareness.
I also
does it use emotion detection?
Yes. So I made 3 projects. The first one was emotion detection, calm, anger, and fear. The second one was fear, calm, anger, and fear, and eye gaze. And the third one, consensus gentium, is just the eye gaze.
Do you think that emotion detection works the same for everybody?
Can you elaborate on your question a bit further, please?
Yeah, so I can imagine that there's I'm not 100% sure that our facial expressions of these emotions are universal.
I agree 100%, particularly around culture. However, when I first did my experience, I was working with Brno University and the professor of computational science. I think this was 2016 with my project Riot. And he's Chinese. And I said, how's this going to work? Like cultural and personality. But he said it's basically mathematical. Like if you frown, or if there's a micro expression, or your mouth is neutral. So very basic, universal, and mathematical and micro. So it worked. I was really shocked. Like I was like, well, I didn't hardly see anything on that person's face. But it was just enough of a trigger. But if the person isn't receptive at all, physically, facially, then it can't pick up anything. But to answer your question, I think the subtlety, it can still detect. But
and it also doesn't have to be correct. Like it's not an end of the world if the machine thinks it's fear and it's actually anxiety, or it's actually something else. And
the one, you're true, that the fear and the anger sometimes got a little bit, was the one that got confused the algorithm the most. And this was in 2016, right? Where we had to you couldn't even Google like facial detection and AI. Like it was nobody's landscape. And so it's kind of almost like sticky tape and code sticking in the back. But it was very accurate. But the one it did confuse was anger and fear. And then, in life as well, sometimes if I'm having an argument with somebody or disagreement or something, I might move into anger and fear during the conversation anyway. So that's quite reflective of how we are as humans.
There's something I was thinking about as well. We don't have the time to dive real deep into that because you mentioned fear just now, but I was also thinking about the difference between maybe not empathy, but maybe call it compassion or something that you're trying to instill, not only fear, but also compassion, not necessarily empathy.
It's more about, I find empathy personally, my interpretation is like you're on the other person, like how are they feeling or what's happening with them. And I'm just like, okay, we got to put the mirror back on ourselves. Because
but for me, if I have empathy, then I actually do care how we feel. If I have compassion, I'm like, yeah, okay.
But I'm not
too bad for you, but I don't care.
This is more about you, like the mirror's on you. So if you do my experience and the perception IO, and you're a cop and you're interacting with a character, you interact with both a black and white character. And I film scenarios where the person has mental health issues, or another scenario where the person's a violent criminal. So you don't know which person it is, but there's clues there on the scene. But to answer your question is, so it's not really about that person, it's how you respond to that person. That if you are becoming aggressive and then afterwards you find that they have mental health, that's for you to look at in yourself and how you reacted to somebody and making that judgment and what you're basing that on. So it's about evaluating, this is my word, perception. A lot of my work is expanding your perception of reality. I work with a neuroscientist as part of my development for this. And I was like, yeah, I want to shift perception. He goes, no, you can't shift perception. You can expand it by including other people's.
Yeah.
So if you think that I don't want someone to feel empathy for that person, the mirror's on you. I want to expand your perception because you can have a greater understanding of the circumstance and situation and the consequences for them and yourself.
Would be really beautiful if you managed to pull that off through an app.
Well, that's the plan with Consensus Gentium, and also activate agency. That's a big thing about my work. So the Consensus Gentium was the first part of that, and then we're now in post-development for Consensus Gentium 2 and Consensus Gentium 3, where Consensus Gentium 1 was highlighting the problem, which is surveillance, bias in tech, and all of that amazing stuff. And part 2 is looking at the solution. Like, am I really going to be spending the rest of my life begging big tech to please be transparent, please have some governance, please have some regulation, please, we really need it. It's like, you know what, why don't we just make our own, can I swear? No.
Yeah, you can.
Why don't we just make our own fucking systems? Even if we start today, it's going to take 30 years. Let's start, let's try, let's not be begging them or lobbying them or demonstrating or protesting. Please do this for us. Let's just fucking do it ourselves, or at least try.
That's why we're taking back the internet today.
That's why we're taking back the internet.
Okay, last question, because I did notice an interesting thing. I started off in this podcast calling it a film, and then actually noticing, no, it's not a film at all. Maybe
should have done your research.
Yeah,
no,
we already
it's infectious.
Yeah, we already called it a game. Yes, it is. Being direct, right? I love it. Yeah, and then actually don't worry about other people's reactions. Just being
feelings.
Direct, and we know we all are, so we can handle it.
We're not human. We don't have any feelings.
Yeah, Dutch aren't human at all. No. So we started calling it a game, actually. And I think there's something in that, because normally I'm sitting next to Jurian Ubars, who is my companion in this podcast. And he is a journalist, but he reviews games. And I think most people think of a game like something you do for fun. But games actually can be really philosophical and actually instill some points. There's like the Fallout series or Mass Effect series that are actually games that you can start a save game, have it span 3 games, and then have multiple endings depending on choices you made before. But, and here is the point a question I'm trying to ask. In the Mass Effect series, you're in space, there's a couple of races, and they all need to work together in the end to get something done. doesn't matter what. But you can be really good or really bad in that game. And that's role playing. That's fun to do. And they call that the Paragon style of playing or the Renegade style of playing. And they actually tell you which is which. So if you're talking to someone, they say, this is the Paragon answer and this is a Renegade answer. So you're going to be good or bad or neutral. I once tried to do a Renegade playthrough. I couldn't do it. I really had trouble clicking that option. And if I did, I made a save game before, click the option to see what happens, then load the previous save file, and then do the Renegade option either way. And before the very end of the game, I also made a save game first, then tried all the different outcomes and reload. And then afterwards, I decided I like this one the best, and then made loaded the game back to before the end, do the great ending that I loved the most, and then stop playing for the rest of my life and decide this is the end I want. So it's...
Oh my God.
I'm
Do you want to
really
spend the rest of the podcast analyzing this dude or what?
I'm wondering if there's
Can
a
you help him
possibility
or what?
in your experience to go about it this way, or do you, because you have to play through the entire thing each time?
I've had people who have done my experience and sat there, it's half an hour each one, sat there for 2 hours or over 2 hours to get as many different branching narratives as they could find because they were very curious. They didn't, the ending, maybe their initial ending was the safe ending, and then they were curious because there's different branches, but there's 3 distinct endings where you're fully compliant and you're basically, your consciousness is uploaded to the cloud because that's really where you're going to end up. You're totally compliant, digitally compliant, even, and or your
Sounds like eternal life as well.
Yeah, eternal.
Oh, I'd love some.
You'd love some. Oh my God! You see, that's you. That's consistent with your with you basically in the other game. And then the other ending was where you're exited out of a digital world and you've got no digital identity or control. So then you're very much limited in your mobility. And then there's one in the middle. So you can go and you can do multiple ones if you want.
I'm really looking forward to it. And thanks for both creating this experience and sharing it with us as well. And thanks for your time talking to us in this podcast. I know Hans needs to go, so we're pressed for time. So I'm going to switch back to Dutch and have one more question for you, but that's the way I have to end this podcast. It's tradition. Yeah, no, I'm not.
I'm going to end it. I'm joking.
Tot zover deze aflevering van Met Nerds om tafel. En Met Nerds om tafel is een podcast van Jurian Ubachs en mij, Randal Pelen. We hadden 2 gastnerds. De eerste gastnerd was... So the first guest was Karen Palmer. Karen, thanks for joining us and thanks for taking the time to do so. Can you point us anywhere online where people can learn more about you?
Oh, okay. So there's a Consensus Gentium, which they see the spelling in the podcast. Yeah. .ai is the website, but we're about doing a revamp because we're about to launch the app. And there's my social media, like my Insta is storyteller from the future.
Okay.
And yeah, you could, and my website's karenpalmer.uk. So they can find out when the app's going to be released on the Consensus Gentium website. You need
to update the Consensus Gentium site because
they're in the process of revamping it. It may even be...
The certificate has been revoked.
I'm being exposed.
Oh, no, it's expired actually. So
my God, are you going to put this on the
podcast? Yeah,
you putting me on you're putting me on blast?
We're the nerds. We have to warn you. You're
I'm
you're
supposed
an
to be
artist.
some
You're
techno storyteller from the future shit. And I'm being exposed on this podcast. Abort. I'm now going back to the future.
No.
I've been exposed.
I can still visit the website.
No, I'm going back to the future.
The exception.
I'm not staying no longer in this present. Listeners,
I'm putting the links in the show notes.
I will see you in the future. I won't tell you what happens to this podcast in the future.
The certificate will be fixed in the future.
Yeah. It will. We promise. Hans de Zwart, waar kunnen mensen meer over jou te weten komen?
Door mijn naam in een zoekmachine te typen.
En niet in LinkedIn.
Ja, en ik zou, waarom zou je dat doen? In plaats daarvan wil ik mensen aanraden om mee te doen met de fantastische leesclub van de 99% Invisible podcast over de Power Broker de biografie van Robert Moses. Wat het boek is wat mij veruit de meeste joy bezorgt dit jaar.
Power Brokers. Die schrijven we op. Dankjewel. Voor nu hartelijk dank voor het luisteren en tot de volgende keer.